Welcome back to the Love Yourself Healthy podcast, everybody. I'm so excited to be back for my second podcast, obviously after a bit of a break. And I mentioned in my last podcast that I had some exciting new podcasts coming up and that they were going to obviously be a lot more regular. So today I have my beautiful friend Taran here. Hi, Taran.
Hey everyone.
I've actually spoken about you on my podcast a couple of times, which you probably don't know. So those who listened to probably I know I was about to say my most recent podcast, but the ones before I took a break, you probably would have heard me say Taran and bring up the name Kids Creating Space, because Taz is just so amazing in the work she does, which we'll obviously get into. And I've mentioned you, Taran, spoken about your work and spoken about the things that you taught me in that training stuff that we were doing together, which had been so valuable, and I still really take on myself and want to bring into my business a lot with all the work that I do. So just so that everyone gets to know you a little bit, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, hey everyone, I'm Taran. I'm an advanced trauma-informed mindfulness and yoga teacher. I have two businesses that I direct. Creating Space Yoga Retreats is a yoga travel agency. So we work with business to business with big brands, and we take students on remote retreats around the world.
So cool.
And the whole idea is that they come for 10 days, 10 to 14 days with us. They completely surrender to a new environment, new food, and obviously a new schedule with lots of yoga and mindfulness, and have a beautiful journey with us. So that's one of my businesses. The second business is Kids Creating Space. And Kids Creating Space is a wellbeing PDHP and dance program running in schools across New South Wales. We started to work with schools to help kids who have been through trauma to overcome their trauma through the body and mind. Then it became something bigger, and now we're really implementing programs to help with anxiety, depression, stress, and all the different things that are happening for children these days at a much younger age. So yeah, we have staff going to schools, wellbeing experts, and really helping kids to learn and to look after their wellbeing.
Which is so important and valuable, and not only for kids who have experienced trauma, but just kids in general. Like a
Mm.
lot of this stuff, I think I told you last time when I was doing training with you, that so many of those strategies can be implemented into any child. Because I mean, I know you'll probably get into it, but I'm sure everyone has some level of trauma and experience that they've been through. But even those who you know may seem on the surface level to kind of had things all okay and not too much, say, behavior struggles or anything like that, every single kid can benefit from the work that you do. Every single person, no matter what age, can benefit from the work that you do. So I'm really, really excited to be able to get into kind of what trauma is and how it presents itself, and kind of how we can work through this, and why the work is really important. And a lot of my followers are obviously people who have struggled with eating challenges or body challenges, but not just that. I have a lot of other people who have just struggled from some type of thing, and they're just looking for ways to overcome it. So I have someone, I obviously won't mention names, who have suffered from some kind of like sexual abuse in the past. And even though, it's not necessarily an eating disorder, it's still, there are so many similar strategies and focuses that you can implement to overcome it, kind of in similar ways than an eating disorder. So
Mm.
all of the information is so relevant for a lot of people.
Mm.
But before we kind of move into it, I'm really interested to know, and I actually don't think I've really asked you this before, but why is this work so important to you?
That's a really good question. So I believe that every individual has a really important place on this earth, and I really feel a lot of us have a lot to offer. However, through our life journey and the experiences that we have in our own personal lives, our light or our offer that we can bring to the world is sometimes dampened and really affected. So I really love empowering people and finding out what it is that they are good at and what they can offer the society and the world, and then helping and empowering them to bring that offer to the table. So I do that with children, and then they also grow up to be the leaders of the world, adults. But I love to also do it with adults. So I take, groups of highly successful people to India, work with them for 14 days, and then they go back and lead in a much, a better way or a different way that they would have in the past. So yeah, my biggest passion is to really find what it is that people do well, and then help them to overcome the challenges that are stopping them from achieving their goals, and also offering their service to the world, because we all need each other, right? That's what a successful, group of living creatures does. They work together.
Exactly right. And it's, as I said before, like in terms of comparing it to maybe someone who struggles with an eating disorder, that's the challenge. And I am trying to help them overcome that challenge, just like you're trying to find, what someone does best in, and giving them those strategies. It's like with eating doesn't have to be seen as this really hard, difficult thing. It could be something that we do really well, but how do we do that really well? What are the strategies that we can implement to do that really well? So everything kind of interlinks, which I kind of love to some degree based off obviously what you're doing. So let's dive into it, because I think when we say the word trauma, it's a kind of scary word. So how would you define trauma? Like, what is trauma?
Yeah, sure. So just before we start as well, anything that makes you feel really uncomfortable, feel free to just pause this podcast and come back when you feel ready, because talking about this can really trigger a lot of people's past experiences. So if you do feel overwhelmed, feel free to take a break, have a bit of water.
on that, this is something that this is a really weird thing, but when it comes to talking about topics like this, as a lot of people know, in my past, I've been through abuse and an eating disorder and all of that kind of stuff. And even though I've done a lot of work to overcome this, there's still a lot of things that can kind of come up for me, which don't necessarily fully affect me, but they actually affect me physically. So if you're watching the video, I actually prepared a hot water bottle, because when I talk about stuff like trauma or things like that, I actually start shaking, and it's not bad, but I get really cold, and that's just kind of my body's way of physically presenting that something's kind of a little bit unsettling in my body. So if you're like me, grab a hot water bottle, because it actually calms me down and stops me from shaking.
Yeah.
So I prepared myself for the podcast.
Yeah. And remember that we are all humans, so everybody at some point experiences a trauma in their lives. So trauma might be, there's sort of three different types of trauma, okay? So what is trauma? Let's start there. So trauma is, in a nutshell, Judith Herman has a really beautiful quote, and she says trauma is a disease of not being present. So it's when something happened to you that the mind gets stuck on that event and therefore struggles to be present, because the mind is worried it may happen again, or the mind is going back over the same events. Yeah. So trauma is a disease of not being present because of some event that happened. So if you think about it, and we've all experienced something in our life, a traumatic event or moment or ongoing, the event happened, and then since that moment, your mind has continuously either gone back over it, or it struggles to live in the present moment because it's always thinking it's coming up again, or it could potentially happen again. Okay, so in a nutshell, trauma is a disease of not being present. Now there are three types. There's many types of trauma, but I'll be really kind of short here. Yeah. So there's one event that happened, so it could be like a car accident, or you witness something that happened, and then that shocks your nervous system. There's ongoing trauma, so let's say sexual abuse or verbal, physical, mental abuse. from, it could be your own parents, it could be your partner, whatever. So there's ongoing trauma, things that continue to keep happening. And then there's generational trauma. So this is when you grow up in a household where your parents or your grandparents went through a war or a trauma. And then that gets brought into your life because of their insecurities and their fears. That's passed down trauma that's intergenerational. So we have sort of three types of trauma. So we've all experienced one of those in our life by the time we get to an adult usually. Some from a child have experienced all three and are still experiencing every day of their life those three ongoings, okay? So it is a very broad topic. It is very complicated and complex. However, we can all relate to something there, right? There's always
Yeah.
something we can connect to.
Absolutely. And that's why I wanted to start with that, because as I said before, when you say the word trauma, there are some people that may have experienced one of the three that you just said, but don't so much associate that as trauma. So it's important to kind of become aware of what kind of trauma means. So you might be really affected by something, but think, I haven't really gone through trauma. So why am I so affected by this? I should just get over it. Like, why does this affect me so much? But understanding that it may be some degree or some level of trauma, and this actually might need some work around it. And this is kind of how we do it. So just that awareness is super important. So I'm curious to know, because the title of this podcast is How Trauma Affects the Nervous System. So let's dive into that a little bit, because our nervous system and our emotions, take up so much of our decisions and our behaviors and our habits and all of that. So it's so important to understand it and see how that might be affecting you. So let's talk about it. Trauma in the nervous system. How does it impact?
Sure. Okay, so again, the nervous system is a very complicated structure. However, if we break it down just for this podcast in a really simple way, we have our automatic nervous system, which is two parts. Okay, so this, you cannot control this, by the way. So this just happens without you understanding why or how. Okay, we don't get to choose this. Okay, we have our parasympathetic nervous system, and that's rest, digest, where healing takes place and when we feel calm and relaxed. Okay, parasympathetic. Then we have our sympathetic nervous system. Now this is fight, flight, or freeze. Okay, this is where the body and brain are trying to survive, survival mode. If you've experienced trauma, your body, your brain would have had to survive. Okay? If you experience ongoing trauma, your sympathetic nervous system starts to become overactive. And eventually, you only live in this sympathetic survival mode, which causes a lot of stress, exhaustion. Okay? What we're trying to do is live in our parasympathetic, and our sympathetic switches on from time to time to keep us safe, or sometimes to get us really motivated to hit that deadline. Okay.
Yeah.
However, we want to live here and use this only for survival. Okay. What's happening in our busy lives and society pressure, and then on top of that trauma, okay, and constant deadlines, constant overwork, is we live a lot in our sympathetic nervous system. Okay, and therefore our general health, our well-being starts to have issues. Okay, so how does trauma affect the nervous system? Basically, we start to live in this sympathetic, and then we learn to live there, and we start to feel unsafe when we are relaxed. Okay, because remember, we're trying to survive. If we constantly have threats coming around us, we need to be very hypervigilant. We need to be very on edge.
Yeah.
Okay, that's how we survive. So we need to teach our nervous system the feeling of what it feels like to be in the parasympathetic, which is calm,
Mm.
and that it's a safe space. And over time, we can build that parasympathetic nervous system and increase the amount of time we spend there.
Mm.
Some, it might start, I work with kids who are very highly traumatized. We start them with 30 seconds and eventually we build them to 45 minutes.
Mm.
Okay, so it's a gentle practice and it takes time, it takes practice, but yeah, teaching the body to be in the parasympathetic, and you only use the sympathetic to run away from that lion or the
Mm.
car, you know, the car that kind of we need to whoop,
Yep.
jump back from, or
Mm.
yeah, so that's in a nutshell.
My regular listeners would have heard me talk about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system quite often. I often refer it to our stress response and our relaxation response, but same thing: stress response, sympathetic nervous system; parasympathetic nervous system, relaxation response. So I've just spoken to this a lot, especially when it comes to binge eating. You can not binge eat. So the process of beginning that binge eating, when you are almost subconsciously shoving food down your face, super fast, super anxiety ridden, almost act that you're doing, that cannot happen unless you were in the stress response, unless you were in the sympathetic nervous response. So that's that response. If you're trying to understand, oh, what does that feel like? What does she mean when we're saying that fight or flight? You know, everyone uses examples of when you're running away from a lion, but yet I've never run away from a lion. I don't know what that feels like. Like, think about if you are a binge eater, that act of, you are going to eat food and you're going to eat food now, and you don't binge eat over the space of like a few hours. You shove as much food in your face as you can before you consciously go, shit, what am I doing?
Mm,
Actually, I might need to stop that right now. That really fast paced action, which thankfully for uh, some people, the stress response is a bit of a shorter experience. But I think something we need to become aware of is that the stress response can present itself in different levels. And when I said a short experience, I mean the height of that stress response. So feeling a full overwhelming stress response in that, say, binge eating moment, um, that's like, you know, the extent of it, the height of it. But we can still experience low levels of stress response, you know, in and out of our life, whether it is like a work deadline. Maybe you're in traffic and someone's really, you know, made you angry and cut you off, and you get that spike of like anger and adrenaline. So yeah, there are different levels, of course. And when it comes to trauma, as Taz said, a lot of people are living in that state for so long. And you know, when we're in that state, if we are referring it back to, say, our body and our weight and our health, we have decreased digestion. Our digestive system nearly shuts down. We
mm,
increase cortisone and insulin. Our metabolism slows down. Calorie burning slows down. Nothing really works as it should. So then how do you expect to go about your day, um, you know, comfortably and naturally? So we do need to learn how to feel safe in that parasympathetic nervous response, how to feel safe when we are in that relaxation response, and what
yeah.
that feels like, which obviously for people in trauma situations or who have gone through past trauma, feeling happy, comfortable, and relaxed is almost uncomfortable. It's super
Mm.
uncomfortable, which is, it's a funny kind of circle to go around into. But let's go through maybe some of the signs that someone is experiencing some trauma effects, and just kind of touch the surface of that.
Yeah, so these can present in a whole range of different ways. So you could have things like biting the nails, picking the skin, playing with the hair, even things like constant tapping and fidgeting. So these are the more subtle
Yeah.
senses that you would be able to understand. Others could be outbursts of emotion. So it could be rage, it could be suppression, where you know you can't speak. Okay, so I
Mm.
work with a lot of kids who, when they have been through trauma, they just can't speak, so the brain actually shuts down. and they can't get their words out. They can't describe what they're going through. So there's a really wide range, like I said, from really subtle to these really big. Could be emotional outbursts. It could be the opposite, going very internal and suppressing everything. It could then be things like overeating, over exercising, becoming obsessed with something because you have control. So remembering trauma is usually, like 99% of the time, something you didn't have control over. So then we sometimes start to try and control other areas of our life, our diet, our partners, our children, okay, our work. Okay, I'm one that likes to throw myself into work when I feel stress, and that makes me feel more soothed, having control over my work. So there's so many different ways, and everybody will experience that differently, and their trauma will present differently as well. Some people are very high functional. So they may have experienced trauma, lots of trauma, and then they become extremely high functioning. They use all of that adrenaline they get from the feeling of, when they're triggered with their trauma, that brings them adrenaline, and then they throw that adrenaline into being really high functioning. So, just because you're a CEO and you're leading in this really powerful way, that could actually be stemming from those trauma experiences, or vice versa. Maybe you don't get out of bed, you're exhausted. You want to watch Netflix and just do nothing. Everybody's trauma represents in a different way. And that's due to coping strategies you've learned from a child.
Yeah.
It's also due to what you've been taught from those around you. Maybe you've experienced something in your household growing up and your mum was a good model at how she overcame that trauma, or your dad, but, brothers and sisters. So it's very complicated. Nobody really represents the same. And that's the beauty of it, is, it's about identifying your own your own habits that you're doing to overcome that feeling of stress and trauma.
And I was smiling at the beginning of what you said, because going through the abusive relationship that I did when I was younger, I never really did get any counseling or do any kind of work around that. I've done all of my work around my eating habits, not really thinking, kind of knowing that was probably what contributed to manifesting that eating disorder and going through it. But as recovering from my eating disorder, I just focused on my eating behaviors and patterns and all of that. But it's not until recently that I've realized, oh, you know what? Like, I probably should do a little bit more work and a bit more healing around the trauma I experienced when I was younger, because, and this is why I was smiling when you were talking about fidgeting and not being able to sit still and picking at your cuticles. Like, if you've watched me in this video, I can't actually sit still. I just cannot sit still. I pick at my cuticles, I pick at my ear, I pick at things, I move, I'm constantly fidgeting my hands. Like, it's definitely something that I'm very aware of, and my partner is very aware of, because he'll sometimes just like grab me and be like, stop moving. When I'm sitting and we're watching movies and he's on like one side of the couch, I'm on the other, and my feet maybe are touching him, and I'm like moving my feet, tapping, and he's like, stop. So it's funny to know that, you can do so much healing around something that's affecting you, such as my eating disorder. But now I'm definitely becoming more aware of like how past trauma is still actually affecting a lot of my behaviors and movements and habits, and that I still need to do a little bit of work around those as well. So yeah, I think it's awareness is such a big one, and such an eye-opening one, and it's exciting as well, because I love self-help and improving myself, and knowing that, oh, there's still some things that I can work on to become a better me. Even though I feel great now, I could feel even better with some awesome strategies to implement.
And just to speak on that, Mel, so
Mm.
what actually happens is when something triggers, and this is why Judith Herman says trauma is a disease of not being present. Because you
Mm.
could be on the lounge watching a really nice movie, and then the mind remembers something that happened, your nervous
Mm.
system responds, and then you
Mm.
start fidgeting. Now,
Mm.
the reason you're fidgeting is because adrenaline, cortisone have gone into your bloodstream.
Mm.
Because remember, you're trying to fight, flight, or freeze when your
Yeah.
sympathetic activates. So you need to get rid of that energy. It's actually there to give you
Mm.
that survival instinct to run away or fight someone. So you start fidgeting or you start tapping. So when we work with kids, we actually, it's funny, but we had trampolines, mini tramps in their classrooms.
Yeah.
These kids, I'm talking very high trauma. So reading could spark that feeling I'm not good enough because they had been
Mm.
abused or so on. That would trigger that cortisone, adrenaline. They couldn't
Mm.
sit and learn with those things in their body. They had to go and jump on the trampoline for 2 to 3 minutes, actually get it out, and then come
Mm.
back and learn. So what my work tries to do is stop the first, learn to be in the parasympathetic, build your nervous
Yeah.
system to get stronger so that this stops coming in and piping up.
Mm.
Okay? Because once this pipes up, we actually have to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it sits there, and then, that's what makes us feel really bad and anxious because we have all that overwhelming sense of feeling that we need to expel and get rid of in our
Yeah.
body.
Mm.
So I just wanted to talk about that because it's a really good point. We talk about we want to not do those habits, but
Mm.
actually we want to go to the root of the cause.
Mm.
Because once the body has spiked and you've got adrenaline, you've got cortisone, you have to use it.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we want to try and do is actually cut it off before it keeps happening. Because once those things
Mm.
are in your system, it's already done.
Mm.
Okay, and you need to use it, you need to get it out, and then you can sit calmly.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do, the work I try to do, is actually stop this constant, you know, cortisone, adrenaline. Try and stop it at the root of the cause. I'm okay, I feel
Mm.
safe, and I
Mm.
can do some light breathing or some movement whenever I might feel slightly triggered to go over there.
Mm. And in terms of adults and kids, is there much
Yep.
of a difference in how it presents?
Um, no, the brain is actually the same. Okay, so, obviously the child is developing, so the brain looks quite differently. But
Mm.
in terms of when the body has those adrenaline and cortisone, you need to. An adult could go and jump on the trampoline and have just
Mm.
as much success as the 5-year-old.
Yeah.
However, obviously, adults can intellectualize and understand more the theory behind it, but
Mm.
that can be more challenging. I'll also
Mm.
teaching a kid is sometimes easier. Can you feel your heart? Can you feel your belly? Can you focus
Mm.
on your breathing? Yeah, I can do that, miss. Great. An
Mm.
adult, well, why am I doing this? What's the reasoning? What's
Mm.
the science behind it? So
Yeah.
sometimes adults have the need to know the why and the how and the science, and then the children, they don't need that information, so they can
Mm.
quickly, more easily
Mm.
train their nervous system.
Yeah.
They present in similar ways, like fidgeting, outbursts. The presenting can look almost
Mm.
identical.
Yeah. Interesting.
Mm,
So, in terms of some coping mechanisms, so someone's kind of identified that maybe they are someone who is experiencing some of these trauma
mm.
habits, and regular things that are popping up. So, moving forward, like what are some of the areas that they should be focusing on when wanting to overcome these kind of habits?
Yeah, great. So if we know trauma is a disease of not being present, what the solution would be is to train the mind to be comfortable in the present moment.
Mm.
And we know that yoga, mindfulness, these sorts of practices are all about present moment experience, nothing more, nothing less.
Mm.
So some people can do that through yoga, mindfulness, and other sort of Tai Chi movement-based practices. Other people might need like a health professional, so like a psychologist, like a coach. Other
Mm.
people might need a mix of everything.
Mm.
Okay, but the very good first place to start would be some simple mindfulness. So
Mm.
mindful eating. Now that mindfulness means you are present in the moment and you use your sense organs to do that. You use your smell, you use your touch, you use your taste, your
Mm.
eyes. What's the last one, Mel? Yes, I have
Is
to think.
awesome.
So we use those senses to make us feel present. We listen
Mm.
to the sounds in the moment,
Mm.
not the voice in our head about the story that happened yesterday.
Yeah.
We look at the subject in front of us, the grass, the sky, whatever it is.
Mm.
Okay, so that's a very good starting point.
And
However, it can go right up to, mental health professionals and so forth.
for sure. And if you think about it, if you are someone who is listening who struggles with those eating challenges or body image challenges, like where did that stem from? There would
Mm,
have been a time when maybe you didn't feel good enough in your body, which is why now you've developed these habits of wanting to be thinner and never feeling happy with the body that you're in. Maybe you have developed these eating habits because eating is the only thing that actually makes you feel happy because of something that maybe you went through in your life where food was the only thing that you could turn to at that time to feel
mm,
comfortable and happy in that moment. So even if you are someone who may think, oh, I don't know if I've really been through trauma, but yet you're experiencing strong body image or eating challenges, think back to how that might link up and how, implementing these mindfulness of practices of being in that present moment are actually going to help you to overcome that. It's all so beautifully interlinked, and which I think is great because once you can kind of identify, how to move forward. Okay, this
mm.
is actually what I'm kind of struggling with, but there are these steps for moving forward. And Tazzy and I have been speaking about, like, especially this time in lockdown, like so many people, and I mean not just this time but in particular right now, so many people are at home and really faced with the reality of their challenges. There's not as much distractions of just going out and seeing friends and going to work. You're really faced with, oh shit, like I really struggle with food, or I really feel awful in my body, or I'm really even just struggling to be home right now, or I don't really actually get along with my partner. And there's so many factors that are happening. And, we're living in a pandemic that you might be feeling like super overwhelmed right now and maybe looking for a place that you can channel the energy into a more positive space. So Taz and I have come up with this kind of like 4-week course for you guys called Mastering Your Eating and Mind. And it's just this beautiful 4 weeks where we can come together and kind of understand what's going on in our body and understand how we can change some of these habits and just become more present and aware of these habits moving forward. So Taz, did you want to say something on the 4-week course?
Yeah, sure. So each week we will have a different focus. You're invited to join us online via Zoom for 1.5 hours each week. So I'll do 45 minutes and Mel will do 45 minutes. I'm going to be taking you through yoga, but yoga specifically for embodiment and to learn how to train the mind to be present. Okay, it's going to be trauma informed, however, it's open for everyone. You don't need to have experienced trauma, but it's more about learning to understand yourself and your signals, your sense signals to then make better decisions for your life.
Yeah, and I'll be focusing more on the eating psychology aspect of it. So, understanding how mind and food are interlinked, and also understanding how we can almost take ownership over our mind when making choices around food and around our body and how we perceive ourselves and all of that. So, we've really created a nice, beautiful blend, I think, of what
Mm,
Taz is doing and what I am doing. And, if you are someone out there who may have experienced trauma, maybe experiencing really some toxic food behaviors, maybe are feeling super uncomfortable in your body, I think this will just be a really beautiful 4 weeks to just be like, okay, let's reset, let's refocus, and let's understand why we're feeling this way, what our triggers are, and how we can implement strategies moving forward to overcome them. So as I said, as Taz and I said, it's going to be 4 weeks via Zoom, 45 minutes with me, 45 minutes with Taz. So you get a whole hour and a half a week. It is $280 and it's 30 people maximum per class. But if we obviously get some more people going through there, a bit of a higher demand for it, we'll put on 2 classes, but we don't want the class size to be more than that because we want it to be nice and personal, so you guys feel comfortable. We can, you know, really get in touch with you guys one-on-one throughout those calls. Yeah, I think it's really, really exciting. I mean, as you guys know, I took a little bit of a break, and I said in my last podcast, in that break, it was probably the best thing I could have done to just reinforce myself of how important this work is for not only me to do because it's my passion, but for other people out there. I mean, everyone struggles, and I think people really need those leaders to be able to help guide them in the most beautiful way. You know, there's so much information out there that is just so damaging for us. So it's important to just kind of hold down, go back to basics, and really understand our bodies a lot more. The biggest work that I've felt in terms of like change within myself has always been when the strategies implemented have come back to mindfulness and being present in my body and understanding embodiment. And that's something that a lot of us, when we're going through struggles, tend to disconnect. We try to disconnect with ourselves. We almost put that wall up, turn the lights off inside, don't want to deal with it another time, try to move on with our life. So yeah, it's going to be a really nice 4 weeks to reconnect with ourselves, and for me to reconnect with all of you guys, and for Taran to reconnect with all of you guys. So we really hope that you will come and join us. So we'll keep all the links down below. I'll put every part of Taran's information down below if you want to get in contact with her. But Taz, did you want to add anything before we wrap up the podcast?
No, I look forward to meeting you all, and it's going to be a great 4 week journey together. And you will definitely leave the course with some new skill sets, some new, theory information, but also really practical skills as well to take home and use in your everyday life.
Yay! And I mean,
thank you, Mel.
The most beautiful part of the generation we're living in is that you just have to open your laptop.
Yes, great.
You don't even have to get in your car and do anything. Actually, yesterday it was raining this week, and like I haven't started my car in like 2 months because I haven't had to go anywhere. And it was pouring rain, and I didn't have an umbrella, and I had to go to the train station, and I was like, it's like a 20-minute walk, and I'm like, shit, is my car even going to start? And luckily it did. But anyway, that's a bit of random information for y'all out there. But yes, thank you so much for joining, Taz. I would have loved to just keep you on here for like 2 hours, but I know you have another meeting or class to jump into. So thank you for giving us your time this morning. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me, Mel, and
You're so welcome.
You all and working together. So thanks.
Yep. So head down to the links below, guys, if you want to join. Feel free to contact us if you have any questions. But thank you, and I'll see you all in the next podcast. Bye-bye.
Bye.